right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Representative Antonio. Also happen to be the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, and we're here this morning mostly in part in reaction to the state of the state last night, and moreover about the glaring omissions of that presentation and how we feel about it, focusing on as a legislative body. And so first I'll say we're all happy to be here in the Caucus. This is the people's house. This is a public building. You're not required to sign a non-disclosure agreement to hear what we have to say in government. Transparent. What we saw last night in the state of the state was pretty much a lockdown facility. Nobody but invited guests. Anybody who was invited had to sign what they saw, and also had to turn in their cell phones, which really had me. We didn't secede last night. We didn't go to war with anybody. I was a little worried, being that they received substantial funding from the Biden administration under the Defense Production Act for the sake of our state, that something was, going to happen. And fortunately, it didn't. It was that we didn't hear anything with regard to the opportunity that we have in a generation, opportunity to actually invest in our state, to invest in. We lead off every conversation with the simple fact and the hard truth that there are $59 billion in our checking and our savings account here in the state of Texas that belongs to people. We can even begin to talk about how to fix things, because if you look back over the last 30 years, that we have ignored a lot of things. I say all the time that mañana is the busiest day of the week here in Texas. We can down the road and we never address these problems. We can certainly talk about them. The most present and in front of us is the state of public education. With $59 billion, we are going to get it right when it comes to investing in our children, and that would mean how we fund our basic schools. You would think that we would honor and respect our commitment to our public educators to give back to a profession that they love. Let's face it, those teachers, men and women, do not do this to get rich. They do because they love to teach, they love to nurture, respect them economically. We didn't hear anything about giving them a pay raise. And it's about a 1,000-page document. You will notice that when we talk about giving tools, we talk about giving raises to teachers, it's buried in a footnote, kind of talk about that mañana. But yet, on property tax cuts, to the penny, bold print, embedded in the legislation, is that we are going to give $9.75 billion. We can have a whole conversation about property tax cuts and whether or not they make it good. But when you lead off with your education document talking more about tax cuts, then I have to wonder and worry that our priorities are sort of upside down. Money in schools, we should be talking about putting money in our teachers, and then if we have money left over, then certainly back. But we should also talk about giving it back to the people who gave it to us. And so, note that when you look at our budget surplus, a good chunk of that money comes from the people. Taking sales tax money to give it back to people who pay property tax. There are a lot of sales tax payers. They're going to be left in the cold. I think that is a fair policy. But again, after we do our bread and butter, our foundational issues, which is legislators, did not hear anything about that. We heard a lot about border security. So much about border security, and I had to go back and check. Governor Abbott himself, that there were 24,000 apprehensions under his watch. Ladies and gentlemen, we have spent dollars on border security. When you pencil that, that's $184,000 apprehension per arrest. Incidentally, that's about $170,000 more than in public education. Right. And so when our values are that we're willing to spend $184,000 on put children and teachers as a footnote in our budget, as an afterthought, also didn't hear is if this border security is such a priority, why are we doing it under the guise and under the cover of darkness of emergency authority? Emergency authority, we don't get to see. We see the money in, we don't see the money out. We accountability, we know $4.6 billion has gone there, but we don't know how it's being spent. Down there, it's costing $184,000 per apprehension, which I don't know if that is a smart system. So I'm looking forward to hear if this is such a great idea. Let's just put this in here like an agency. Let's put a bright light on it. Let's audit it. Let's have legislative oversight, and let's let lawmakers and taxpayers and citizens decide whether this is not being done in some room all here where no one gets an invitation to know what's going on. We heard nothing about the last 30 years. There are things that we can control as a state, tremendous impact on. When is the last time college tuition has gone down? That's something we can do here. Every month, just like families across this state, we sit at our table trying to figure out what are we when we're having, a challenging time economically. When is the last time it went down? When is the last time your homeowners agreement went down? That is another. The state has something to say about with our Department of Insurance. How many times have we been sitting and trying? How much longer is it going to take me to get to work? Why does it take me the same amount of time that it takes me to drive from Slaughter Lane to the Capitol? Because I sit in traffic talking about, and thanks to the Biden administration, we have lots of revenue to have on traffic congestion. We have the means, not so sure that we did not hear anything about that. And there are a number of kitchen table items. I take the governor at his word that he doesn't want to work in good faith, but I do not measure a person on what they say I have done. And when I look back over the course of 30 years, Republicans are in charge of pretty much everything. Over the last 30 years, we have kicked the can down the road. We have a once-in-a-generation make smart investments, strategic decisions, ask Texans to share the responsibility, squander it with pet projects and tax cuts that don't touch everyone and fix the things that impact us all. And that's what Texas Democrats want to do this session. We want to invest in opportunity with our budget authority, with our budget leverage, with our budget experts to make sure that when we spend this money equitably, we are going to look north to south. We are not going to be blinded by demographics. We're going to be blinded by what's right and what's wrong. Our investments, and the Democrats have the capacity and certainly have the bandwidth to do that. And so you're going to hear that today from somebody. Honor, this is a Friday, but all of us have really been home or should be home, and people have stated that we can have this conversation. So I'm grateful for all my colleagues who delayed travel to stay home with their constituents, should be home with their families, should be back at their jobs, because let's face it, home like we can today. So colleagues, I'm grateful for you being here. I want to turn the podium now to the Black Caucus and friend from Forbes, Chairman Roberts.
To our amazing, phenomenal leader, Faye Martinez-Fisher. I'm Ron Reynolds, and I'm proud to serve as chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. And last night, I listened to Governor's State of the State address, hoping that he would unite our state, hoping that he would have a message that resonated with but yet what I heard as Representative Martinez-Fisher just laid out, I heard red for his MAGA base. That's what he was catering to. Those were the things that he seemed to focus on. I could go on and on about many of the things, but I'm going to talk about a few of the things that he didn't. Governor Abbott talked about how Texas is the seat of knowledge. In Texas, 39th in the nation for per pupil school funding. A missed surplus. We have to prioritize our public schools. He didn't talk about teachers that are leaving the classroom. He didn't talk about how the best place for public education because our kids are competing in a global economy. Focus on something that will be hurting our public schools, and that is another issue that we didn't hear Governor Abbott talk about is the real crisis occurring in Texas to Black women facing maternal and infant mortality. Texas has the distinction of leading the entire nation in infant mortality deaths. Texas is #1. Governor Abbott did talk about that. Texas continues to lead the nation with the highest number of uninsured. Yet federal dollars because of partisan politics and not expanding Medicaid. And even other red states. We're one of 12 or 14 states that haven't expanded. And yet there's so many people who are dying because they don't have access to care. There's so many people be getting care for diabetes. There's so many people that could be getting early detection and able to have treatment instead of going to the emergency room, sure it's stage 4, and now they can just make you comfortable. When the doctor says, I wish you would have came to me early because I didn't have health care. So that health is a human right. We heard Governor Abbott recently talk about equity and inclusion policies in Texas, and that is unfortunate. When you look at the group here, this group reflects the diversity of this state. Yet, when Governor Abbott wasn't speaking to the diversity of our state, he wasn't speaking to the majority of the resident ethnically minorities. We heard nothing about common sense. You know, when I was listening to the State of the Union address, I heard President Biden, who represents not just Texas, I heard him talking about the families from Uvalde. I heard him talking about since gun reforms. I heard him talk about red flag laws. Yet I heard Governor Abbott not mention how we can prevent school shootings by reducing gun violence, by having common sense gun age to purchase assault rifles from 18 to 21, from having and implementing guns away from people that shouldn't have them, how we can close the gun show loophole so the people shows go to private sellers or internet buyers and avoid background checks. He said about this, yet while we just saw just recently another shooting, Texas has the distinction, unfortunately, of leading the nation over the last shootings. But what did he do? Nothing. Finally, about raising the minimum wage in Texas so the Texans could have a livable wage. He was touting how we're the 9th largest economy in the world, the entire world. But I'm also equally disturbed when people can work full time to sustain a living for themselves, yet alone a family, at $7.20. It's time to raise the age in this state. So while we heard about the government tonight, there were far too many things that were unsaid. And I'm proud to stand here with my Democratic truth to power, to represent the voice of the voiceless, to make sure that issues that Representative Trey Martinez Fisher articulated, that we address those issues. And we hope that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will join us so that we can have that is the best place to live, work, and play. And finally, among a record surplus, $33 billion, plus over $11 billion in our rainy day fund, our historically Black colleges, Prairie View A&M and Texas Southern. On top of that, we have to give our retirees a much-needed pay raise. So let's stop having them pinch pennies and decide they're going to buy, be able to pay their rent. They shouldn't have to be faced with those choices when we have a record surplus. And let's make sure that we hold Governor Abbott accountable for all Texans, not just the far primaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I have Chairwoman Donna Howard, who chairs the Women's Health Caucus.
I am Donna Howard, State Representative for House District 48 here in Travis. As a nurse, I welcome Governor Abbott's very brief references to listing of emergency items. Increasing mental health professionals in our schools, increasing access to Narcan to address the epidemic of fentanyl. However, as chair of the Women's Health Caucus, I am disappointed that there was no recommended action to address our unacceptably high maternal deaths in a state where 1 out of 4 women of childbearing age and where more than 50% of the births are Medicaid births. This legislature passed and the governor signed a bill increasing coverage from 2 months to 6 months in an effort to save the lives of small moms. Without CMS approval, that extension has not yet been implemented. Fast approaching the end of the public health emergency, meaning it can be kicked off of Medicaid after only 2 months, despite to expand coverage to 6 months. With the declaration, we would be able to ensure immediate implementation of the 6-month, thereby helping prevent the deaths of countless Texas moms to thrive and take care of their babies and families. Time is waiting till later in the legislative session is not in the best interest of moms, healthy Texas babies, healthy Texas families. More will unnecessarily lose their lives while bringing these new lives. We need immediate action. We need to save Texas moms.
Thank you, Chairwoman Howard. Next up, representing the immensely of Representative Gina Nelson.
Thank you. My name is Representative Gina Eno. I represent Central Austin in the Texas House District 49. But today, Mexican American Legislative Caucus. And I'd like to recognize our Mount Representative Jean Wu, Representative Terry Mesa, Representative Penny Morales-Shaw, Lou Floyd is here with us today. Legislative Caucus here in the Texas House is the oldest and largest in the country. And today, first and foremost, with the 5.4 million students who are Latino, that is 53% of students in our public schools. These are our kids, and we deserve to fully the education of our kids. Our schools need full funding, and as we support funding our schools based on the child in our schools. Texas is one of just 6 states punishes our schools by deducting funding when students. This is bad policy, and it is even worse in the era of a son at home with COVID today. This means he will miss an entire because of quarantine requirements. This is the second time this school year he's had COVID as well. Another entire week of school that he missed to students, families all across this state. It is higher absences, it is a loss of learning, and it means a significant funding of our schools. We must fully fund our public. One more important investment we can make than in our kids and in our future. We unequivocally stand against any scheme to fund our public schools through a private voucher. Clear about who gets a choice in the governor's school choice plan. Choice to decide whether a certain student, whether a certain fits the bill, whether a certain student or a certain family goes to the school is part of, whether they are the right religion, the right to, whether they can afford the rest of the tuition that the private school, whether the child scores high enough on a test, is smart enough, disciplinary record or not. And by the way, if your child has special and your school district is spending about $50,000 to deal with your learning disabilities, a private school can say, great fit. We must fully fund the education of all our public school children. No more schemes. Classrooms and kids. We will never forget lives lost in Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary. And in solidarity with the families who lost loved ones, in support of gun safety legislation, and in particular, a bill to raise the age of assault-style weapon from 18 to 21. Raise the age to 21 for the 21 lives lost. It is the simplest, should be the easiest reasonable request that these poor families are making of our government, of our body. And shame on us if we can't deliver. But Texans across the state who fear for their own safety. Texas is the largest economy, and the part of our economy is our workforce. And we know that economic development happens. A strong Texas economy starts with a strong and skilled work, ensuring safe working conditions, fair wages, paid maternal and paternal leave, and we stand with the Women's Health Caucus and the Black Legislative Caucus. Coverage to postpartum moms, Medicaid coverage for up to a year. Ultimately, increase access to health benefits for hard-working Texans who are the family system. Texas must remain the best place to open up the pays a fair, family-supporting wage. A strong and healthy to our state's fortune. But today, thousands of Texans remain with Texas ranks first in the amount of uninsured Texans, insured veterans.
That's right.
We must expand Medicaid, the billions of taxpayer dollars for our own people in the state. Texas is our home, and we are proud of where we come to contribute to this state. Our job is to do what the hard, courageous, and people of integrity of this state deserve. That is responsive, that is accountable, and in the prosperity of all Texans. Thank you.
Next up, we have House Democratic Caucus First Vice Chair, Representative G.
Thank you, good morning. My name is Gene Wu, state rep out of Caucus. I'm the House Democratic Caucus first vice chair and also the newly formed Asian American Legislators Caucus. You know, watching Governor Abbott's State of the State, that it's 2023, because you could have taken from the past 3 or 4 election cycles and his plan and just played it, and it would have been basically about exactly the same. So I don't know why all that money doing this State of the State was ever something from the past. It's like a band that had like one good song, never had any new ideas, never knew any new songs, and eventually all venues. Because there's no future. Governor Abbott and the Republican Party of Texas are firmly entrenched. There is no future for them. All they know is what they've done in the past by a path forward. If there is a future for Governor Abbott, this is like a B- resume builder to be at best, because there's no new ideas, progress, there's no future in this. Well, there's something new that's on Governor Abbott's agenda and the agenda in Texas. And that is unabashed the Asian American community. To pass legislation, to offer legislation such as SB 522 that directly see a person from certain places because of their name, they're a danger to our country. They're spies. And instead of just targeting government actors, instead of targeting companies connected to those governments, everyone, we go after people who are refugees, people who have fled, my family, fled oppressive communist countries, who fled religious fascism in Iran, the murderous dictatorship in Russia. All are treated with discrimination because of their nothing else. And this is a future that is dangerous for Texas. Because so much of our economy into international trade. China right now, largest trading partner with the state of Texas. It is the 3rd largest purchaser of goods, oil and gas, heavy machinery, agriculture. This is 2023. Our economy, I'm not sure Governor Abbott and Texas Republicans understand that. They want to put up a giant sign that says Texas is closed for business. Could not have done a better job by offering these types of legislation. To not only say we're worried about governments, but we're going to treat every single person what they have said and whether or not they actually appear those same governments themselves. And we will treat them like they are our. And this is, I'm speaking as a leader who has dealt with an unprecedented rise in violence in our own communities for the past 3 years. And this type of legislation, a future where there will be more attacks, where there will be more hatred, discrimination. And there will be more deaths. They're going to come. You know, and I say this, but it's not really new. We've done this. We've done these same over 100 years ago. Back as far as the 1800s, passed these laws because our state said to ourselves over there, they look different, they speak different. Maybe they. And you know what? We're going to make sure they can't be our nation. Make sure they have no place in this state. Is what the Republicans of this Abbott envision, that is not a future that this state needs. It is not a want.
That's right.
Leave the 1800s in the 1800s. Texas is ready. We have an unprecedented opportunity budget. We have an opportunity to move the state, but it's not going to be from Governor Abbott. It's not going to be from the legislation that's being offered by the Republican Party. We need a future not based on white nationalism that represents the entire state. That every community has to be successful. That every person, no matter who they are, what their religion is, what their gender is, what their sexual preference is, we have a future to build every single Texan moving forward. And Democrats have that future for you. We have a future where we have education, we have a future where we have healthcare. Teachers are not afraid to teach about Black history and Latino history, and because we are not scared of the future like Governor Abbott.
Thank you, Representative Wu. Our next speaker, just want to put someone I think has a very unique perspective. She comes from a swing district, so I'm really, as I imagine, reflects the views of not only what Democrats think, but those of independents and Republicans. And so we have our freshman representative from Collin County, Representative Mahaley.
Thank you so much. My name is Mahaley Lisa, and I represent health in Southern Collin County. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today and tell you about my district. Is vibrant. It represents schools and Fortune 500 companies that Greg Abbott mentioned last night in his statement. What attracts families and companies to places like Collin County and districts like me. But what was once the Texas miracle for everybody has for many. Last night, we heard about Texas' first place nation, first in corporate relocations, first in the nation for jobs. Last night, we heard about all the great places doing. But what was left out reveals what our leaders are trying to hide. There was no mention that our state also leads the nation in maternal deaths. Mothers dying. Most of the time during or after giving birth. This is not Texan. Texans trust women to make the right their health and the health of their families. Majority of Texans to our great state want this legislature to add exemptions abortion ban passed by radical extremists, especially of rape and incest, and for children who aren't even sex. These are victims. Texans, 2 more years to wait for relief. Texans and businesses expand Medicaid for women, children, and all Texans waiting on wait lists for over 20 years. Feel alone, they feel unheard, and cast away. They don't have 2 years to wait for relief. The Texas miracle is because this institution passed legislation restricting companies. It didn't blossom from us preventing women from accessing health care because families were kept in agony waiting. Actually, really the opposite. Our state should be focusing these days of this legislative session to appropriate the one budgetary surplus responsibly. $30. I know. That's just the surplus than some states' entire budget. This is y'all's money. Spend it in the next 3 months. And last night, during the there was no mention of how we should do this. A healthy and strong workforce leads to a thriving economy filled with jobs and the American dream. Those are the values that I hold dear. Those are the values my family, when they immigrated here from Romania, fleeing communism, freest nation and state in the world. That one small community moved to is now 40 years later growing at twice the rate. It's growing because it's welcoming, it's diverse. In order to keep the Texas miracle alive and live up to that promise, have a world-class education system. One that can compete in a global market, starts with fully funding public schools, not taking money out of our school system, so-called savings plans. The thing about school choice is, it's if you get chosen. Last night, Governor Abbott said we would fund schools. I have seen no evidence of this. Budgets and actually see money being cut from public education in the amount of $9. In the same year, we have a record-breaking survey. And gentlemen, that's called defunding public education. If we were to schools at 50%, like the state of Texas did when I was a 4th grader at Brino, Texas, then our property taxes would go down, our recapture payment, and you would see long-term relief, not just a one-time rebate. In the classrooms, our children would have safe learning environments, and our able to retire with dignity and security. We have the money, and Texans don't have 2 more years to wait. They, like I said, and like you have seen, there is no shortage of ideas. This House has already filed 24 pieces of legislation, more than 12,000 legislative drafts. I know I have personal, as well as all the amazing Democratic colleagues that are standing up here. Now, it's time for Governor Abbott to work with us. The real invest in the tomorrow of Texas. Now, the Texas miracle is at stake.
Thank you, Representative Lisa. That concludes our remarks.
We have a question for NPR. As House Democrats remain at mind, how they leverage their power to pass the priorities.
That's a question. So listen, when you theological issues, all the issues that divide us, and set them to the side because it is a budget session. This session is a mathematical calculation. Republicans cannot spend the amount of money they want without them in the legislative process. What I mean by that, by my view, we'll be taking a number that requires 2/3 majority, which is 100 votes. And so if we need a budget and we have to take that vote more than one time, then we have to leverage our offensive priorities, the things that we want, the things we want to see in this budget, and we always the bad ideas that we don't want to see the light of day. We're willing to work, be peace, and be realistic. But this session, like none other, and we have a few additional chairs.
Patrick Spacek would like to know what House Democrats think of the 10-year mandatory minimum that Lieutenant Governor is pushing for.
I think Texas Democrats are always going to be at the table when it comes to criminal justice, criminal justice minds, and some of the biggest subject matter experts in that issue. We have a committee that is that will be having these discussions when it comes to criminal justice. And so we will fully participate in those conversations. We have a justice system that is just, but also fair. It will protect society. It would also show trust that the Democrats on those committees will certainly represent that view and that voice to make criminal justice proposal. And then one of the place I mentioned in public education, seems to be on the chopping block. We are upset about this idea of vouchers because by our math, we look at just up here on this dais, we have members that are on Article 3 of the Appropriations Committee. And if you look what this legislature passed 2 years ago, not from the time you introduced the bill, not from the committee hearing, not from the floor debate, and not from the behind-the-scenes conference negotiations, but the final budget, when it's all said, we appropriated $47 million to Article 3 public education. The Senate is asking for $38 billion. I think that's about a 19% decrease. So you cannot take the national stage and talk about being the education governor, introducing and getting behind a budget is taking $9 billion out for the next 2 years. We think that's a little sus. We're going to study this budget. We're going to make sure it's right. We have plenty of resources sitting on the sidelines. And from my view, I don't think we're interested in any kind of money out of public schools until we know that our teachers are whole, until we know that our students are whole, until we know that and then we have done our job to provide the one and only thing we're supposed to do in this Constitution, give a good education. Right. And that's our mission, and that's our assignment. We appreciate you all being here on Friday. We couldn't do this last night. That was the governor's security call. We're here today. We're ready to invest in Texas. We're ready to work, and the time is now.